She had misgivings, but none of the other apartments she'd seen had come through. She signed her Xerox of the lease and paid the lawyer roommate first, last, and a month's rent for security. She had money left over and didn't get a job right away, so in the mornings after the guys left for work, she'd sit on the couch in the living room and look at the clouds. When a train went by on the tracks across the street, black smoke would rise and she'd stand and watch the people walk up the station steps. The lawyer roommate turned out to be something more than she expected. He was on some form of psychiatric drug, laudanum or lithium, she couldn't remember which, and he scratched at his skin disease all the time. When she took a shower at night, he watched her go from bedroom to bathroom and back again. She hated him. One night, to escape the creepy roommate, she went out for a drink with the all-right roommate. That's how she described Mark in her mind. He smiled and made jokes she only sometimes got. After their third round, he told her he had an affair with a married woman when he was in grad school, and she told him she'd had an abortion 3 months before. When they got back to the house, he found his key first and unlocked the door. After this, it was a regular thing to use one another to escape the other roommate. At first, they'd exit the apartment separately and make up fake destinations so the lawyer wouldn't tag along, but eventually they left together and didn't worry about hurting his feelings. Still, she felt lonely in this new city. Most nights she walked alone to Harvard Square and back, looking in the storefronts and watching people pass her in noisy groups. One night in Wordsworth, she bumped into a woman in the fiction section. They laughed, talked about Virginia Woolf, and decided to go out for a drink. In the downstairs bar of Pizzeria Uno, they sat across from one another, drinking wine and eating popcorn. The woman's name was Gail. She graduated college the year before and was a substitute teacher in the Boston school system. Anne told Gail about her apartment and being new in town and how she needed a job. Gail gave Anne the school department number and her own phone number. They kissed on the sidewalk before they walked in opposite directions out of the square. Soon Anne became a permanent substitute for a school in Roxbury, teaching 5 classes of juniors and seniors, and she waitressed a couple nights each week for extra money. She and Gail went dancing together, and she met new people. When Anne and Mark escaped the lawyer roommate, they talked about her students and his work with the agency. She worked hard and felt content. Then summer came. Anne waitressed full-time while she looked for a fall teaching job, and Mark talked about a new apartment. She figured she'd go along with whatever he decided. First, there was the basement place in Central Square. It was large, though dark, and when they came back to it for an inspection before moving in, they found a leak in one of the rooms. After canceling his check to the landlord, Mark called it Das Boot, like a movie they'd seen about a German submarine. Then there was the 3-bedroom place in a new building in North Cambridge. It had washers and dryers in the basement, a parking lot outside, and an application for rental. The realtor rejected them last minute because they couldn't find a 3rd roommate to sign the lease. Finally, Mark found a 4th-floor spot in a security building in Davis Square. 2 bedrooms faced one another adversarially across the space of a small living room that opened on a kitchen. Anne took the smaller bedroom. She liked the doorknobs there better than in the larger one. For a while, she enjoyed coming home to the new apartment. Then Anne began to hate Mark. He bought a new couch, a new carpet, and a cabinet for her stereo. He shared his food. He let her play any album she wanted, and he took phone messages for her when she was out. He was the perfect roommate, and she couldn't stand it. She only knew there was a tension between them she couldn't name. She spent most of her time alone in her room. Gail told her she should feel lucky she lived with a nice guy. Anne said she felt she wasn't free. She felt married with all the disadvantages and none of the advantages. She looked for a boyfriend without luck and began suspecting Mark. Of what? Gail asked. Of, I'm not sure, but something, Anne said. Gail said instead of looking for another man, Anne should sleep with Mark, but Anne said she didn't like him that way. We're just friends. One Friday night, Anne stayed home. Mark was there too. He'd bought a loose joint from a friend, recreational drug use, he called it, and he asked her if she wanted to get high. She took a couple of hits and looked at his back as he bent to choose another album for the stereo. She remembered Gail's advice. She sat next to him on the floor, put her hand on his arm. Let's sleep together. She looked into his eyes and saw pain behind the light green color when he said no. He didn't think she loved him, and he didn't want to have sex with her that way. Anne had never heard a man say anything like that before. She didn't think a man might want to feel her love for him before he slept with her. But she couldn't stop now. She said, "Please," and touched his arm till he consented. She went into the bathroom to put in her diaphragm. The jelly felt cold as she spread it around the rim. When she came out, the convertible couch was folded out to a bed, and he was laying in it. She undressed in her room, then stepped into the dark living room. When he touched her, she felt a tingling sensation in her body that she'd never experienced before. She moaned her pleasure, and the same sound came from his throat. She didn't feel alone until he came, then laid down beside her. Anne said, "I didn't come." Mark looked into her eyes, and beyond them she could see his slender shoulders, naked, and he said, "You have to want to come." She felt afraid of him then, and didn't speak. In the next week, she had sex with Mark 2 more times. She no longer felt the tingling sensation, but she felt the disappointment. The final night, he came into her bedroom, and she moved his hand while she kissed his mouth. Small waves of pleasure slipped from her, so gentle, nearly unfelt. After he'd come inside her, she felt annoyed that her pleasure wasn't greater, and she asked him to go back to his room so that she could sleep alone on the narrow mattress she kept on the floor. They never talked about what happened. He came home from work hurt, and she came home angry. When summer approached, they talked about renting. She wanted to find a new place on her own, and he wanted to stay in Davis Square with her. Through a man friend, she found a studio in Porter Square. Mark decided to move further from the city and share a place with 2 friends from work. On her own, she made some gains in her life, but with men it was always the same. She never stayed with anyone because she felt dissatisfied. She saved her money and took a trip. For 7 weeks, she traveled through European cities, thinking about Mark and telling herself that he was the only man who ever really loved her, and she left him. She wondered if she'd betrayed herself by not confessing her pleasure to him in bed, but also she remembered the fear. On the plane from London, she watched the sun pass through the massless clouds, and she promised to tell him she loved him when she saw him. The night she returned to Cambridge, she went dancing with Mark and a friend of his from New York City. When the friends separated from them, Anne put her arms around Mark. She kissed him, and she told him all that she had practiced on the plane on the way home. "I only want to be your friend," he said. "I don't love you, Anne." She felt like Scarlett O'Hara falling for Rhett Butler once it was too late. After the guys left her at her apartment, she studied the loneliness behind her black and green and blue eyeshadow. A week later at a friend's house, she re-met a man she thought attractive, and he walked her home. She invited him upstairs. She poured 2 glasses of wine, and together they finished the bottle. They became lovers that night, and she decided to stay with him for the winter. He held her close, and his body felt warm in the cold apartment. A few weeks later, Mark visited her and told her his father had been hospitalized and he should rush down to Queens the next morning. They drank and talked about other things, but his face remained tight. She teased him then, told him he looked too handsome with his new haircut, and she wanted to sleep with him. "One more time, please." In bed, his kisses felt dry on her lips. His skin was cool against hers, and when he entered her, it hurt. As he put on his pants, he said, "See, Anne, we're just friends." She lay sleepless that night, watching the tree outside her window, a black figure moving against the orange glow of the night sky. She thought about her lover before Mark, leaving her to face her abortion alone. She thought about her new lover, violated by her infidelity. She'd have to leave him. And she thought about Mark. He'd victimized her with the coldness of intimacy. Could she ever find mercy in a man? Thank you.
Susan Spivey.